John and Jane have found their first house. See the happy couple as their American dream is about to come true. By golly, the realtor says it's available.
Yeah, we'll get you in there right away.
The lender tells them that based on their income, they should be able to pay for the house.
Well, this looks pretty good.
Things look promising.
Just imagine it, Johnny.
Sure looks great, Jane.
The lender pays an underwriter to assess the financial risk associated with our young couple. She then recommends a mortgage rate to the lender based on the risk of non-payment that she thinks John and Jane represent.
Qualified!
Are you two kids ready to own your own home?
Boy, are we ever!
Hot diggity, I've been waiting for this for years.
Now, we did have to make a few minor adjustments. So basically, what's happening here is so when are you two ready to move in?
As soon as possible.
Don't worry, folks. Crikey, the American dream works for everyone. Time goes on, and Jane and John start a family. The house fills up with the pitter-patter of little feet and all the joys of family life. But little Timmy needs braces, and Sally requires asthma medication every day. John's company downsizes, and he loses his job. Jane works 2 part-time jobs, but they just can't seem to keep up with their house payment. What with all the car repairs, student loans, grocery bills, veterinary fees, telephone bills, school supplies, health insurance, gas money, clothes for the kids, Duke Energy, car repairs, student loans, grocery bills, veterinary fees, telephone bills, school supplies, health insurance, gas money, clothes for the kids, Duke Energy, car repairs, student loans, grocery bills,
car repairs, student loans, grocery bills, veterinary fees, telephone bills, school supplies, health insurance, gas money, clothes for the kids, Duke Energy, car repairs, student loans, grocery bills, veterinary fees, telephone bills, school supplies, health insurance, gas.
John and Jane keep trying to catch up on their mortgage, but gee gosh, they just keep accumulating more penalty fees for missed payments. They even try making partial payments, but the lender refuses to accept the cash. Each month, they fall further and further behind. The lender calls our friends John and Jane on the phone. He wonders where his money is and warns that if he isn't paid soon, he might have to foreclose. John and Jane try to get their mortgage loan modified so their payments are more manageable. They want to pay their bills in full, but it's hard while John is still looking for a job. Our busy couple keep calling their lender, but they never seem to be able to connect to the right person, and they never receive a loan modification. One rainy day, Jane and John receive a registered letter in the mail. The lender had decided to begin foreclosure. John and Jane try to slow down or stop the foreclosure, but the process is confusing, if not downright mysterious, and they aren't sure where to turn for advice or help. Finally, they give up. Before 2008, our nation acted as though the growth of the economy would continue unchecked for decades. But whoa! It didn't. So what does all this have to do with our dearest John and Jane? Everything. Just like everyone else, our young couple was swept up into thinking that the market would provide promotions and bonuses all their lives. They didn't expect that they would get caught up in the financial misrepresentations of Wall Street investment firms. But John and Jane are just the tip of the iceberg, victims of the same aggressive lending practices that have contributed to over 60,000 foreclosures in North Carolina alone over just the past year. Those foreclosures, in turn, are pulling the rug out from under the housing market, destabilizing our economy. How did we get here? Come on, lean closer. We were all seduced. Most people applying for a home loan are unfamiliar with the process. They assume that the banks, or whoever else is giving them a loan, are looking out for their best interests. But the truth is, deregulation has made it easier for banks to sell loans to people who really cannot afford to pay them back. You see, following the stock market crash of 1929, Congress created the Glass-Steagall Act, an act that placed barriers between banks that gamble, called investment banks, and the banks that ordinary people create savings accounts in, called commercial banks. Before this regulation, banks, as businesses, had used funds from individuals' private accounts to finance risky stocks and trades. The Glass-Steagall Act mandated the separation of commercial and investment banks, protecting everyday Americans from having their investments, such as pensions and 401ks, from being used to fund these risky gambles. Unfortunately for us, the Glass-Steagall Act took many hard blows over the years. Finally, in 1999, it was repealed by the Clinton administration. From that time, commercial and investment banks have been able to merge, becoming larger and larger, and using funds from ordinary people like our John and Jane to finance the mortgage creation and selling business. But why would a bank want to make loans to people who can't pay them back? Don't banks make their money from the interest on loans? What happened that made banks so eager to make loans that were almost certain to go bad? Let's look again at our doe-eyed couple and see how they ended up with a subprime mortgage. Well, John and Jane fell for the same gimmicks and devices that we all did with the housing boom. See, their lender didn't concern himself with whether they could pay back the loan. He works in an incentive-based system which encourages lenders to focus on making as many loans as possible, regardless of whether borrowers can afford to pay them back. Besides, soon after John and Jane's house was financed, the lender's bank sold the loan to another company. But don't worry, we'll get to that later. One recently popular tactic used to lend to otherwise unqualified borrowers was the stated income loan, in which borrowers could simply state their income without it being questioned or verified. Stated income loans allowed opportunities for lenders to increase the reported incomes of borrowers, qualifying them for loans that they could not afford. It wasn't uncommon for lenders to pressure borrowers to exaggerate their incomes. Some unscrupulous lenders would even alter a borrower's income after the paperwork had been signed without the borrower's knowledge. Back to the lending process. Lenders also used other bait-and-switch tactics to hook borrowers into bigger loans or loans with more expensive terms. On closing day, they'd come into the lender's office to learn that the paperwork had been revised. Most folks would still go ahead and sign after their lender told them.
And in this economy, you don't have to worry about a few dollars here or there.
Other lenders encouraged borrowers to increase their loans, in order to have a few $1,000s in their pockets.
It's just a little extra money, and you've got years to pay it back.
And just between you and me, taking out extra cash didn't seem like a big deal at the time. When Jane and John bought their house, it was valued at an inflated level because the housing market was booming, and it was common for home values to be slightly inflated. They were quite surprised when several years later their home quickly went underwater. The economy collapsed, and their home value decreased. Suddenly they were making payments that were equivalent to more than the home was worth. To banks, more borrowers and bigger loans meant they could collect more profits when they sold the loans. But even after the loans were made, the greed, recklessness, and tomfoolery continued. Like a great many other homeowners, John and Jane's loan was sold many, many times. The loan originators have no interest in the long-term viability of the loans because by the time a default may occur, the loan is already in someone else's hand. The firms who buy loans in bulk then make their profits by slicing each individual loan into tiny portions. These loan slices are mixed and matched with slices of other people's loans and repackaged as mortgage-backed securities. By the time these mortgage-backed securities are then resold for profit, these freestanding financial products are almost completely divorced from their underpinnings. People living in houses trying to pay back their mortgages. Misleading endorsements by top rating agencies such as Moody's and Standard & Poor's made mortgage-backed securities appear to be a safe investment. This increased their demand among investors, in turn perpetuating the need for more and more loans to be made. With all these mortgage loans changing hands all the time, it was not uncommon for paperwork to get lost and the chain of title to become obscured. Today, there are tens of thousands of homes where it's not even clear who owns them. The demand for more and more mortgage loans to provide the raw material for mortgage-backed securities sped up the loan origination and loan selling processes to irresponsible levels. Instead of buyers and sellers taking the time to examine the details of each loan, stacks of home mortgages were signed en masse by untrained individuals who were told not to bother to read what they were signing, sometimes even using forged signatures. Thus, robo-signing was born, and once loans started to go bad and foreclosures shot up, the banks moved robo-signing to a whole new level, requiring low-paid, untrained people to sign off on hundreds of foreclosure documents a day. Many of these contained errors about who owned the property, the payment history of the borrower, and any number of other defects. In states like North Carolina, where foreclosures are often heard by clerks of court unaware of this area of law, these robo-signed documents usually slide right through, and it can all happen in a span as short as 60 days.
Homeowners these days, they've just been so irresponsible.
By the time a family's home is foreclosed, multiple profits have been made along the way. By the real estate agents, the appraisers, the underwriters, the lenders, brokers, banks, investment firms, even the law firms that do foreclosure filing on behalf of the banks. Everyone gets their cut. Oh, and by the way, those law firms often take another cut when the foreclosed house gets resold. Well, not quite everyone gets a cut. Everyone but people like Aunt John and Jane get a piece of the pie. John and Jane get deceived, taken advantage of, and booted out of their homes while the systems that set them up for failure make record profit. And oh yeah, remember how Jane and John had all that trouble getting a hold of their lender? They wanted to modify their loan so they could pay back the money they owed. But it was just so difficult to talk to anyone with the authority to do so. As John and Jane tried to get their loan adjusted, more penalty fees and missed payments accumulated, making it even harder for them to catch up with their debt. Our lovebirds were strung along to the point of exhaustion. The bank could not have sent a clearer message. The 2008 financial crisis created an economic recession that has greatly impacted North Carolina and the rest of the country. This recession itself was triggered by the unsustainable and fraudulent games that big banks played. With record job losses and unemployment, people everywhere are struggling to pay their bills. Now is not the time to allow big corporate interests, the very corporate interests that created this mess in the first place, to override the interests of the American people. When one home is foreclosed on, one family is without a place to live. That in itself is a tragedy. When millions of homes are foreclosed on, it's a blow that strikes at the heart of our communities. Each month, roughly 300 homes are foreclosed on in Guilford County alone. Now is the time for North Carolinians to act. In 1933, the United States Congress supported an investigation into the role big banks played in creating the Great Depression. Corporations and the people running them were actually made to answer for their greed and fraud. Today, our nation's attorney generals have coordinated a settlement with the 5 biggest banks that lets them off for faulty foreclosures with barely a slap on the wrist. Foreclosure victims will receive a $2,000 pittance as compensation for the loss of their homes and the roofs over their heads. This isn't good enough. We all deserve better. We won't turn our economy around by relying on the so-called experts in the finance industry who brought us this mess in the first place. We need to confront this collectively with constructive, community-based responses. That means we need regular folks to get involved. Let's not be silent any longer. Let your voice be heard as you tell your friends, your neighbors, and your elected officials that we will no longer tolerate fraudulent foreclosures and corporate greed in our communities. It is time we wake up and do something. These are our issues. These are our lives. Let's take them back.
Oh, hi there, folks. Don't close the door on us just yet. Wait until you hear what else we have in store for you tonight. We all have the opportunity, remember, to turn this around. Good luck, best wishes, we think you are swell, and we're all in this together.